Hi, BookTube, and welcome to my Friday reads. I'm going to talk about 3 books I finished, actually 4 books, sorry. Weather by Jenny Offill, The Universal Baseball Association Inc. By Robert Coover, Body Tourist by Jane Rogers, and I'll talk about the 4th one when I come to it because it's slightly complicated. Okay, The Universal Baseball Association Inc. by Robert Coover. A book sent to me by Mitchell Axler in that package he sent me, which I did as a surprise unboxing video. And I'd read 2 previous Coover novels as part of my sort of investigations into sort of 60s onwards postmodernism. Hadn't really got on with him, but this is the business. I really enjoyed this. I will say for British readers though, this, you know, a lot of this revolves around baseball, the jargon, and the significance of the lesser significant parts of the game, so that if you're not familiar with it, you might struggle. So I do put that caveat on it. But anyway, 56-year-old J. Henry Waugh, who's a bachelor and works as an accountant, has an all-consuming pastime, and with just the aid of 3 dice, pencil paper, and some charts that he's drawn up, sort of mathematical probabilities and algorithms on the dice, he has established an 8-team fantasy baseball league, and he plays all the games using the dice. But he doesn't just play all the games. He imagines press conferences. He does the crowd noises and shouts. There's a veteran player who's a Hall of Famer who has become a singer-songwriter and composes lots of ditties about. So basically it's a whole world-building exercise, which is very much what authors do. So this guy playing his fantasy baseball has created this world of these characters which are all imaginary, but in his head they are so real, so realised, as I say, which is exactly what an author does. And I think that's quite deliberate. And then one day, the dice throw a very unusual combination that sets off a whole chain of events, which sort of sent his league into crisis. And I say it sends his league into crisis rather than sending him into crisis, because 80 to 90% of this book is the fantasy baseball league, and only 10 to 15% is the real life that he lives as an accountant, and where they blur, where they merge. So, for example, when he goes to his local bar for a drink after a game, after he's rolled the dice and finished a game, he populates that bar and aligns it with the bar that the players go to. And what you get is the description of the scene in the bar inhabited by the players, not so much his. He picks up a barfly female. I'm not sure if she's actually a prostitute, but she may well be in real life. And, they have sex, in which he plays the role of this super pitcher who has just rolled what's called the perfect game in baseball, which is the highest achievement any pitcher can have. Basically, that gives him a hard-on, which he seeks relief in this barfly woman, but he seeks relief by inhabiting the persona of this pitcher. So, the fantasy baseball has sort of, infected his sex life, in which he's living a fantasy of being this pitcher. So there's a lot about the sort of blurring of the boundaries between reality and fiction. But it's more than that. It's way more than that, I think, because what you realise is that as he spins these stories, it's less about the dice and the algorithms and the probabilities, and it's much more about the stories of these characters. There's the politics of the league. The commissioner has to stand for re-election every 2 years, I think. So there's stuff about politics. As I say, there's stuff what the players do after the games, and they're all sort of, either getting drunk in bars or they're egging each other on and stuff. He is spinning narratives. J. Henry Waugh is spinning the same sort of narratives as any author, including Robert Coover, does. So from this sort of dice-laden game, the narratives are word narratives coming out of Waugh's brain. The dice do not roll to say what anecdote is told in the pub afterwards. And, you know, it's a brilliant sort of metaphor for the art of writing. And then right at the end, it goes to suggest, you know, this league that he's created from nothing begins to become mythological in the sense that it has a mythos, it has a legend, it has legendary players, Hall of Famers. And it does go a bit kind of full out towards suggesting that this is the origin of myths and legends that go on to form the basis of religions. It's a really interesting book in that respect. The only caveat I have, apart from if you're not a baseball nut, understanding all the jargon and stuff, the caveat I have is you, the reader, are trapped in the fantasy as much as J. Henry Moore is. There's no escape from it. You know, the world is very hermetically sealed and almost claustrophobic. And, you know, either you go with that or you don't. So I gave this 4 stars. You know, I really enjoyed that. So thanks, Mitchell. To the point where I'm going to continue with Coover, because after his first 2 books, I had a downer on him. I wasn't sure I was going to continue. On to Jenny Ofill's book, Weather. So this is the follow-up to her book, The Department of Speculation, which I read last year and enjoyed. Very much in the same style, very epigrammatic looking, you know, short, punchy paragraphs. You know, that's what an average page looks like. And there's very little follow-on directly from one paragraph to the next. So, you know, you get all sorts of different things. You know, you get bits of philosophy. You might get stuff about, you know, politics, jokes. There's some really good jokes in here, and I'll read one out as an example. And the characters. But you're not getting a continuous through line on the characters. You're getting little snippets interspersed with other things. So the main character is a female librarian. She's married to Ben and has one child called Eli. There's also her drug-addicted brother Henry. There's a potential lover who's a war reporter who's just come back from Syria and is having to sort of decompress. There's the librarian sort of guru figure called Sylvia, who's a university lecturer and podcaster, who's sort of quite spiritual in her utterings, but it's becoming more and more focused on climate change and the catastrophe and sort of apocalypse that we're all facing through that. To the extent that Ben and the librarian play a sort of game of sort of fantasy game of what they call preppers, being prepared for the collapse of civilization. And, you know, they have it in their mind that they'll scout locations where they'll be safe when you know, society sort of collapses and things like that. And that's basically it. I did find it very similar to Department of Speculation. I suppose Department of Speculation was more focused on the marital unit of the husband and wife and the child. This is more about external effects on the central, but it had very similar feel, and therefore I'd kind of seen it before. You know, she's done it once. I kind of felt, okay, this is your style, this is your shtick. Give me something else. But it is well written. You know, the ideas are great, but just something about it I just found slightly unfulfilling. So I'm going to read you an example of just how well written it is. In Maplewood, we sit on the porch looking at their yard. Catherine's mother says she's thinking of planting a lilac bush. Her father says the last one died. You have to pick a hardier variety. It is possible they're having a fight, but it is so quietly done that I can't be sure of it. There is nothing to do but walk around here, so I decide to ignore my twinging knee. We walk down the street beneath the flowering trees. No one else is out except the gardeners, legions of them on the lawns, working quietly. There is one house where a famously liberal rich person lives. On this lawn, the gardeners are allowed to play their Mexican music. So, you know, within the space of those 2 paragraphs, you've got the sort of the interpersonal, you know, a long-time married couple having a row, but in such a sort of quiet, civilised, decent manner over, you know, it's all coded, heavily coded around a bush. And then you get the sort of the social critique of all these gardeners who've come from south of the border. They're probably all undocumented, so they're all absolutely sort of slavish in you know, what they, you know, they're not prepared to buck the rules in case they, you know, they basically lose their jobs or get handed into the authorities, except a token liberal white homeowner says that their Mexican gardeners can listen to their music. So within 2 very short paragraphs, you get the idea of just how much information, how much of an impression is relayed. And then another one. I miss the express bus and have to take the local home instead. Just the other day, I heard one woman tell another that the slowness is a form of goodness. This bus is full of old Russian people holding shopping bags between their feet. I sit across from a hot guy in a green coat who looks as if he's trying to place me. When I was younger, I sometimes knew why a man was staring at me, but these days, it's often no more than a lapse in memory. So again, just a comment on the passage of time within a long established marriage. Beautifully done. And then finally, an example of the jokes are very good in here, and they are told as jokes, or written as jokes, I should say. A woman walks into a dentist's office and says, "I think I'm a moth." The dentist tells her, "You shouldn't be here. You should be seeing a psychiatrist." The woman replies, "I am seeing a psychiatrist." The dentist says, "Then what are you doing here?" And she says, "Your light was on." I laughed aloud at that. I thought that was a great gag. So 4 stars for this. I prefer, I got more out of this than I did this, but in a way they were both very self-contained, and that's why I couldn't give either of them 5. And on to Body Tourist by Jane Rogers, a British author who wrote Mr. Rose Virgins, which has turned into a TV series over here. I've never read her before. I picked this up because it is a sort of a mass market book, not normally a book I type of read. I picked this up because of its theme, which has some overlap with my current work in progress. And I do think it's a great premise, that basically your memories can be digitally preserved, and then there are 2 characters that sort of kick off the action here. One is Gudrun, who inherits a huge wealth from her oil tycoon husband when he dies, and she invests it in a doctor called, is he a doctor? No, a researcher called Luke, who's basically on the autism scale, and he is looking into technology to take those digitally preserved memories and to download them into a living host for 2 weeks. That's why they're called body tourists. And the stipulation is that they have to be young, fit and healthy. And it turns out that these are volunteers who are richly rewarded, £10,000, which doesn't sound very much, giving your body and mind over for 2 weeks when you're basically sort of unconscious, or at least your conscious is not aware, is not aware of itself and can't advance itself over those 2 weeks. But £10,000 is an awful lot in this London of 2045 when this is set, the near future, where Rogers is talking about the huge divide between rich and poor. I'll come back to that. So I thought it was a fascinating premise, and the tales of the people who are brought back I thought were quite interesting. There were certain moral dilemmas, obviously. The fact that they're only alive for 2 weeks means that they're given a sort of chemical cocktail, so they don't just spend that whole 2 weeks brooding on the fact they're going to die a second time, and all they've got is 2 weeks. But the problem I had is, 2 weeks, what difference does it make? The only situation where you can get anything out of that, to my mind, is where there was unresolved family or friend issues when you died. Here you get the chance to go back and make up, both for the bereaved who are left behind, but also for the person who died. You can kiss and hug and make up. So I can see the value of that, but for anybody else, what's the point? And indeed, certain things start to go wrong with some of the people who are brought back to life. I won't spoil it more than that. So that was one problem I had. Why is this such a great thing? And towards the end of the book, it suggests, well, this is research, and the long-term aim would be obviously to make it much longer. But then what you're doing there is you're killing a young person or putting them into sleep stasis to borrow their body for much longer periods, and whatever. But the problem I had with this book is, as interesting as the premise was, it doesn't really seem to be about that. That was just something to hang what the message of this book seems to be, which is about this rich-poor divergence that Rogers is talking about. This is more than just a few no-hope kids being collateral damage in the development of a post-life experience. This is about us and them, the poor, powerless and young versus the rich, powerful and dead. They've taken the wealth and the jobs and the country. They've locked us into estates where we don't live but survive, addicted to virtual reality and junk food, poorly educated, poorly fed. And we have only one thing left that they want: youth. How can you enjoy your wealth and power in an old decrepit body? Or worse still, a dead one. But they can use their wealth to rent young bodies and inhabit them. While they're enjoying those bodies, the young owners lose the use of them. The old are buying youth and the young are losing their final asset. If you fast forward 20 years, don't you think every single teenager will be selling months of their youth to rich dead people? And the northern estates will be battery farms for them. Brilliant economics. It keeps rich old people happy and it keeps money in circulation on the estates. Youth is monetised. Win-win. And I just thought that was really leaden, plodding writing. Not a very sophisticated treatment of the ideas of rich and poor, and you know, down to the point of owning your own body. And the book goes from character to character, both Gudrun, Luke, those who were brought back from the dead, and those youngsters who give their bodies up and then get them back afterwards, and we follow what happens to them afterwards. And the main one of those was basically a young woman. She invests the money that she's given into setting up a dance studio, because she's she was always like dance, on her estate, on her sink estate. And we get an awful lot about, you know, the trials and tribulations of trying to run this business, and, you know, always needing more money, and therefore would she, you know, what's she going to do with this Luke guy in order to keep the money flowing and all this sort of stuff. And it's really uninvolving. It's just, I don't care about, you know, they do talk a bit about the morality of it, but they're just not very interesting, the young characters, when they come back and they get their bodies back, because they don't remember anything. They're not aware of what went on in those 2 weeks, and that's fine, and that's what the technology does. Therefore, they have nothing to say about it. Whereas the ones who come back, we follow them in the 2 weeks, and they are more interesting. But a lot of this book is about the characters who come back and what they do, and you know, what they feel about it, even though they have nothing to base it on, because they don't know how they felt during that time. And it's all just to hang this stuff about, you know, poverty and wealth. And it reminded me very much of the book by Naomi Alderman called The Power, which also seemed to be near future, although she did twist something about that to actually take it further back in time. But anyway, where it was a very much our recognisable world, and the politics of it came to dominate the science fiction element of it, the interesting premise, the conceit. As with this, you know, this almost ceases to be science fiction, as The Power almost ceases to be science fiction, because they're going on about our contemporary world, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but neither did it well enough to make it interesting. Yeah, I was really disappointed in this book. I gave it 2.5 stars. Okay, and finally, I just have to look something up for this, because the 4th book I read was the Provisional Biography of Mose Eakins by Evan Dara. And I don't own a physical copy because Evan Dara, the writer of The Lost Scrapbook, which is a great book, has produced this. It's a play script, although I don't think it's intended ever to be produced in a theatre. 80 pages long, and the only way you can get hold of it, because it's not on Goodreads and it's not on Amazon, is you download it from his website, or the website of his publishers, and you can download it in PDF form, or I think in Mobi or Kindle. Anyway, I did it as a PDF, and I will post the link in the comments book if you want to download it for free. It doesn't cost anything. And you know, I really enjoyed the Lost Scrapbook. And I wondered if he'd written anything more recently, and this is what he's done, and it's brilliant. This is a 5-star read for me. So basically, Mose Eakins is middle management, and the play starts with him sort of having 1-line or 2-line conversations with people as he passes, and they're all at different levels, different types of conversations. You know, they're not all just about work. And this is a guy in control. He's, You know, he's multitasking. He can switch from one register to another like that. That's how it starts. And none of these conversations, none of these one-sided conversations, hook up and interact with each other. And then he discovers that actually everything he says is being misheard by everyone he speaks to, he comes into contact with. That what he hears himself saying, which is what he intends to say, is not being received by the people that he's talking to. They're hearing something else completely different, completely random, and he has no idea what they're hearing. And it's described later as, you know, it's the sound of speech without any of its weight. And that's exact. And he goes to a series of doctors, and this is he finds out that this is described as, oh God, let's see if I can find the word. I'm going to come back and paste what the word is. So basically, he sort of hits this crisis. He loses his job because he can no longer function. The only person who seems to sort of be able to still communicate with him is his girlfriend. Not because she's getting the words as he's saying, but because they have that relationship, the language of love, that sort of lover's empathy. She, like a dog, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but she can tune into the sentiment in which he's saying things, if not the actual words. And that seems to be good enough for them to sort of get by, you know, communicating. So that's the only person who he seems to still be able to communicate with, until he starts going to sort of street food stalls and ordering the food to eat. And they say, yes, you know, that will be 95 cents or whatever. So any time that he orders something and pays for it, there's no problem in language. There's no issues. So he then conducts an experiment where he meets a guy in a park who I think is a tramp, but I'm not sure, and sort of pays him 50 cents to repeat what he says as a sort of, piece of mundane conversation. And the guy does it, and then he pays him $1 for a slightly longer version, and then he pays him $5 for something sort of quite deep and philosophical. And there is a lot of sort of one-line philosophical quotes from throughout history are in this play about the language and the nature of language and semantics and things like that. So the two occasions where people understand him is where he's transacting, handing over money in return for his words. And I think that that this, apart from all its sort of talking about language and reception, and the fact that people are no longer really listening to each other anymore in the sort of world of social media and echo chambers, which is very much between the lines here, that we've lost the art of being able to communicate because we don't listen to each other, we don't hear each other. But I think there's also a critique of capitalism here, that the last language that will disappear from our tongues is the language of commerce, because it's very important for us to place, to describe exactly what it is we want, and to hand out, and to know how much the money is, and to hand it over. And let's face it, one of the origins of language, you had calendars sort of scratched into stone and trees, but you also had inventories and sort of basic accounts in ancient cultures of Egypt and Sumeria and Babylon and things like this. So it's sort of almost a returning to our sort of roots of language, and in a way it's like Alzheimer's. We are all having a collective Alzheimer's as we can't talk to each other, and the bits of language that we lose are all the sort of more recent sort of things of science and technology and stuff, and gradually we'll only be left with the origins of language, which as I say was sort of calendars and commercial. So I think it's a very, very brilliantly executed book. And Mitchell, if you're watching this, I'm pretty sure that Dara is a big fan of William Gass, because the Lost Scrapbook is mainly, if not all, I can't remember now, told as sort of dialogue in the way that Gass did. And Gass is Gass is one of the people cited in here during the play who gets a line. So I can't recommend this highly enough. It's free. It's 80 pages, so it won't take you long to read. I really recommend, and as I say, I'll provide the link, you read this. And if you like it, go and read Evan Dara's The Lost Scrapbook. Okay, so that was my Friday Reads. Till next time, thanks very much.